In a world that scorns him, Kelvin's gift changes everything. One chance encounter with a billionaire sparks a revolution. Can a garbage collector outsmart racism and rewrite his fate? You won't believe what happens next. Watch now. Move it, Kelvin, or I'll make sure you're out of the way by sundown. Mitch's voice sliced through the humid Chicago morning, his red face twisted with contempt. The supervisor loomed over Kelvin, a 27-year-old African-American garbage collector, whose lean frame glistened with sweat under a tattered orange vest. Kelvin's dark eyes flickered with restrained defiance, but he said nothing, gripping the trash bin tighter. Around him, his white co-workers, Jake with his sly grin, Tom with his meaty fists, Eddie with his mocking chuckle, formed a circle of scorn. Their taunts were a daily ritual, each word a needle pricking at Kelvin's pride. Worthless. Slow to you, boy. Kelvin, wiry and weathered, bore the weight of their hatred as he hauled refuse through Chicago's elite neighborhoods. At 27, he was trapped in a life of grinding poverty. His Englewood apartment, a crumbling cage where dreams went to die. 3 years on this job had dulled his edges, but not his secret. Kelvin could speak 9 languages: Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, Japanese, mastered through late-night study with borrowed books and street conversations. His gift was a flame he kept hidden, useless in a world that saw him only as the man who cleaned its mess. Today, the air crackled with tension. Mitch had saddled Kelvin with the heaviest root again, a punishment for some imagined slight. As Kelvin wrestled a bloated bag into the truck, Jake tossed a crushed beer can at his feet. "Fetch, scholar," he sneered, the nickname a cruel jab at Kelvin's overheard mutterings in French. The laughter burned in Kelvin's ears, his knuckles whitening. He wanted to unleash a torrent of words in every tongue he knew, to drown their ignorance. But survival meant silence. He picked up the can, tossed it into the bin, and moved on, his heart a storm of unspoken rage. By 10 a.m., the truck rumbled into Kenilworth, where mansions stood like monuments to wealth. Kelvin's boots hit the gravel of a sprawling estate, its white stone facade gleaming under the sun. A brass gate plate read, "D. Laurent." Dylan Laurent, the French billionaire, was a name whispered in awe: tech mogul, real estate titan, a man whose shadow stretched across continents. Kelvin didn't care. To him, it was just another stop. But as he dragged the bin toward the truck, chaos erupted. The mansion's oak doors flew open, and a man stormed out, his voice a blade of fury. 20 minutes, Claire, 20 minutes until this deal collapses, and you're useless." Dylan Laurent was a vision of power, 47, tall, with silver-flecked dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut through the world. His tailored navy suit hugged a frame honed by discipline, his polished cufflinks flashing as he gestured. His French accent sharpened each word, but his rage was raw, universal. Behind him, Claire, a frazzled young woman in a pencil skirt, clutched a tablet, her blonde hair slipping from its bun. "Mr. Laurent, the Japanese contract. I can't decode the legal terms." Dylan stopped dead, his face a mask of disbelief. "Billions are on the line, and you're failing me?" He raked a hand through his hair, his composure fraying. Kelvin froze, the bin forgotten, his pulse quickening. Japanese. The word hit him like a spark. He shouldn't interfere. This was a world of glass and gold, not his. But the desperation in Claire's trembling voice, the weight of Dylan's anger, pulled him in. "I can do it." Kelvin's voice was low, steady, slicing through the chaos. Dylan and Claire whipped around, their eyes locking onto him, a garbage collector, sweat-soaked, standing in their pristine driveway. Kelvin's heart thundered, but he held his ground, his slim frame suddenly seeming taller. His bandana was askew, revealing a forehead creased with determination. His dark skin glistening under the sun, his hands, still gloved, gripped the bin handle. but his gaze was unflinching. Dylan's brow arched, his skepticism sharp as a blade. He took in Kelvin's worn boots, the frayed hem of his vest, the grit under his nails. "You," he said, his voice a mix of doubt and intrigue. "You can translate Japanese?" Kelvin nodded, his throat tight. "And 8 other languages, legal terms, technical, whatever you need." Silence crashed over the scene. The fountain's gurgle was deafening. The truck's idle a distant hum. Claire's mouth parted, her tablet slipping in her grip. Dylan's eyes narrowed, assessing Kelvin as if seeing him for the first time, not as a shadow but as a man. Then when, with a decisive motion, he thrust a sheaf of papers toward Kelvin. "You have 15 minutes, he said, his tone a challenge. "Don't waste my time." Kelvin's fingers closed around the contract, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just paper, it was a door, a chance to be seen, so his mind raced, parsing Japanese characters he'd memorized years ago in a library's dim light. As he scanned the text, the world faded. Mitch, Jake, the truck, the taunts. There was only this, a billionaire's trust, a ticking clock, and a gift no one had ever valued. Dylan watched, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Claire hovered, her panic shifting to curiosity. Kelvin's lips moved silently, his eyes darting across the page. The contract was dense, merger clauses, liability terms, but he saw through it, his fluency a blade cutting through the fog. 10 minutes later, he looked up, his voice firm. "It's done, the translation's clean." Dylan took the papers, scanning them with a predator's focus. A slow nod, then a glint of something, respect, in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. Not to Kelvin, but to the universe. Kelvin's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt visible. The mansion's driveway seemed to pulse with new energy as Kelvin handed the translated contract back to Dylan Laurent. The billionaire's sharp blue eyes scanned the pages, his silence heavier than the Chicago heat. Kelvin stood, heart hammering, his orange vest a stark contrast to the pristine gravel beneath his boots. Claire, the flustered assistant, hovered nearby, her tablet now forgotten. For the first time in years, Kelvin felt the weight of being seen, not as a garbage collector, but as someone who mattered. Dylan looked up, his expression unreadable. "This is impeccable condition," he said, his French accent softening the words. "Where did you learn this?" Kelvin swallowed, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Self-taught, books, apps, people on the street. I picked things up." Dylan's brow lifted, a flicker of intrigue crossing his face. 9 languages, you said?" Kelvin nodded, bracing for disbelief. Instead, Dylan slipped the contract into his briefcase and extended a hand. "Come with me. The board's waiting." Kelvin blinked, his gloved hand hesitating before meeting Dylan's firm grip. The billionaire's palm was cool, his handshake decisive, as if sealing a pact. Claire gaped, but Dylan was already striding toward the mansion, motioning for Kelvin to follow. The garbage truck idled behind them, Mitch and the crew oblivious to the seismic shift unfolding. Kelvin glanced back, the weight of his old life tugging at him, but Dylan's voice cut through. "Now, Kelvin, time's short." Inside, the mansion was a cathedral of wealth, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, air cool and scented with cedar. Kelvin's boots left faint dirt smudges, each step feeling like an intrusion. Dylan led him to a glass-walled conference room where a dozen executives in tailored suits sat around a mahogany table. Their eyes flicked to Kelvin, confusion rippling through their polished faces. A man with a silver beard leaned forward, his tone clipped. "Dylan, who is this?" "This," Dylan said, placing the contract on the table, "is the man who just saved our deal." Kelvin, explain the translation. The room's attention pinned Kelvin like a spotlight. His pulse surged, but he straightened, peeling off his gloves to reveal calloused hands. He spoke, his voice clear, breaking down the Japanese contract's nuances, merger clauses, risk allocations. cultural subtleties. The executives listened, some scribbling notes, others exchanging glances. By the time he finished, the silver-bearded man was nodding, and a woman in a red blazer murmured, "Remarkable." Dylan clapped Kelvin's shoulder, a gesture that felt like a crown. "Stay where you stayed," he said. "We could use you." The words landed like a thunderbolt. Kelvin's mind reeled. A job, a chance, a door to a world he'd only glimpsed through mansion windows. But as the meeting adjourned and Dylan pulled him aside, reality crept in. "This isn't charity," Dylan said, his gaze piercing. "I need someone with your skills. My company's expanding globally, and I can't trust half the translators out there. Work for me. Kelvin, start tomorrow." Kelvin's breath caught. Tomorrow? Leave the truck. The road. The life he knew. He mumbled agreement, dazed, as Dylan handed him a business card embossed with gold. "Be here at 8, Dylan said, then turned to answer a call, leaving Kelvin to find his own way out. Outside, the sun was higher, but the world felt different. Kelvin trudged back to the truck, the card burning in his pocket. Mitch was leaning against the cab, chewing tobacco, his eyes narrowing. "Where the hell you been, Kelvin? Slacking off again?" Kelvin opened his mouth to explain, but Jake cut in, smirking. "Probably begging for scraps at the big house." The crew laughed, their voices a familiar blade. But this time, something snapped. Kelvin's hand closed around Dylan's card, and he met Mitch's glare. "I was working," he said, his tone sharp. "Better than you ever will." Mitch's face darkened, his fist clenching. "Watch your mouth, boy." The word hit like a slap, but Kelvin didn't flinch. He climbed into the truck, the crew's jeers following him. As they drove to the next stop, Kelvin's mind churned. Dylan's offer was a lifeline, but it meant stepping into a world that wasn't his, a world of suits and stakes, where one misstep could send him crashing back to the gutter. That night, in his cramped apartment, Kelvin sat on a sagging couch, Dylan's card in hand. The walls were thin, the neighbor's TV blaring, but he barely noticed. He thought of his mother, who died believing he'd be more than this. He thought of the languages he'd learned, each one a key to a door he'd never dared open. Now one was ajar, but doubt gnawed at him. Could he really belong in Dylan's world? The next morning, Kelvin arrived at the mansion, his work boots swapped for a borrowed pair of loafers, his vest replaced by a clean shirt that felt too tight. Claire greeted him, her smile cautious, but kind. "Mr. Laurent's waiting," she said, leading him to an office where Dylan sat behind a desk, reviewing documents. "Kelvin," Dylan said, looking up, "ready to change your life?" Before Kelvin could answer, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face paling. "Sir, the Tokyo team just sent a new contract. It's in Mandarin, and they need it by noon." Dylan's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Kelvin. "Can you handle it?" Kelvin nodded, but as he took the document, a shadow crossed his mind. Back at the depot, Mitch had seen him leave early, his sneer promising trouble. Word of Kelvin's absence would spread, and the crew's resentment would fester. He'd defied them, stepped out of his place, and men like Mitch didn't forgive. As Kelvin began translating, his pen steady, but his heart racing, he sensed a storm brewing, one that Dylan's offer might not shield him from. Kelvin's pen flew across the Mandarin contract, his mind a fortress of focus despite the storm brewing inside him. Dylan's office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek mahogany desk, felt like a different planet from the garbage truck's grime. Sunlight streamed over Chicago's skyline, but Kelvin's thoughts kept drifting to Mitch's sneer, the crew's jeers, and the life he was trying to leave behind. At 27, he'd spent years being invisible. Now, under Dylan's expectant gaze, he was exposed. Every word he translated a test of his worth. Claire hovered nearby, her earlier skepticism replaced by quiet awe as Kelvin deciphered complex financial terms. Dylan leaned back in his leather chair, his sharp blue eyes tracking Kelvin's progress. "You're faster than my entire translation team," he said, his French accent laced with approval. "How does a man like you end up hauling trash?" Kelvin paused, his pen stilling. The question wasn't cruel, but it cut deep. He saw his mother's face, her tired hands braiding his hair, whispering he'd be somebody. He saw the scholarship he'd lost when she got sick, the bobs that turned him away for his address, his skin. "Life doesn't always ask what you know," he said finally, his voice low. "Sometimes it just tells you where to stand." Dylan's jaw tightened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Before he could respond, Claire's tablet pinged. She scanned it, her face tightening. "Mr. Laurent, the depot manager just called. They're claiming Kelvin abandoned his shift. They're threatening to fire him." Kelvin's stomach dropped. Mitch, he'd known the supervisor wouldn't let his early departure slide. The crew's resentment had been simmering, and now it was boiling over. Dylan waved a hand, dismissive. "Let them. Kelvin works for me now." But Kelvin's chest tightened. The depot wasn't just a job, it was his anchor, his proof he could survive. Losing it, even for this, felt like severing a lifeline. Dylan slid the finished contract across the desk. "This is perfect. You're hired, full-time, effective immediately. My team's flying to Berlin tomorrow for a summit. I want you there, translating, negotiating, whatever we need." His tone was final, a king decreeing a new order. Kelvin nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. Berlin? He'd never left Chicago, never owned a passport. The gap between his world and Dylan's felt like a chasm. As Kelvin left the office, Claire handed him a company badge, her smile tentative. "You're one of us now," she said, but the words felt hollow. Walking through the mansion's marble halls, Kelvin caught his reflection in a gilded mirror, borrowed loafers, too tight shirt, a face still carrying Englewood's weight. He didn't look like one of us. That evening, Kelvin returned to the depot to clear out his locker. The air was thick with diesel and tension. Mitch was waiting, arms crossed, his bulk blocking the entrance. Jake and Tom lingered behind, their smirks sharp as knives. "Thought you'd run off to play hero," Mitch said, spitting tobacco onto the concrete. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" Kelvin's fists clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm just doing my job." Mitch, like always. "Your job." Mitch stepped closer, his breath sour. "You're nothing but a street rat who got lucky. That rich guy's gonna chew you up and spit you out." The words landed like blows, echoing Kelvin's own fears. Jake chimed in. "Heard you're jetting to Europe. Better not trip over your big head." Kelvin grabbed his things, a spare vest, a worn notebook of language notes, and turned to leave. But Mitch's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "You don't walk away from me," he growled. "You're still ours." Kelvin yanked free, his heart pounding, and strode into the dusk. Their laughter chased him, but so did a new resolve. He wasn't theirs anymore, not Mitch's, not the depot's. He was something else, something he was only beginning to understand. Back at his apartment, Kelvin sat under a flickering bulb, Dylan's badge in one hand, his notebook in the other. He traced the pages where he'd scribbled Japanese kanji, Arabic script, German verbs. Each word was a rebellion against the world that had tried to erase him, but Mitch's words lingered, venomous. What if Dylan's faith was a fluke? What if he failed in Berlin? The next morning, at O'Hare Airport, Kelvin stood in a suit Dylan's assistant had overnighted, a charcoal gray that fit like a second skin. The terminal buzzed with travelers, but Kelvin felt like he was stepping onto a tightrope. Dylan approached, his presence parting the crowd like a blade. "Ready?" he asked, handing Kelvin a passport, freshly issued through strings only a billionaire could pull. On the plane, a private jet with leather seats and champagne flutes, Dylan revealed the summit's stakes. "We're securing a partnership with a German-Chinese consortium," he said. "Billions in renewable energy. They respect precision. Kelvin, you're not just translating, you're shaping the deal." Kelvin nodded, but his mind raced. This wasn't a contract on a desk, it was a battlefield of words. and he was the weapon. As the jet soared, a revelation hit Kelvin. Dylan wasn't just offering a job, he was handing Kelvin power. Power to speak, to be heard, to reshape rooms full of people who'd never seen him coming. But with it came a truth. Mitch and the crew weren't the only ones watching. Dylan's world had its own predators, and Kelvin's gift made him a target. A flight attendant delivered a tablet with an urgent message. The consortium had added Russian and Arabic terms to the deal, a last-minute curveball. Dylan's eyes locked on Kelvin's. "Can you handle it?" Kelvin's mouth went dry, but he nodded. As he opened the tablet, his fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of who he was becoming. Back in Chicago, Mitch was plotting, his anger a fuse already lit. Kelvin didn't know it yet, but the depot's shadow was longer than he'd imagined, and his rise was about to spark a reckoning. The Berlin summit was a crucible of power, its glass-walled conference center gleaming under a gray German sky. Kelvin sat at a polished table, flanked by Dylan and a dozen executives, facing the German-Chinese consortium. His charcoal suit felt like armor, but his heart raced as he translated Russian and Arabic contract terms in real time. His voice steadied despite the stakes. Billions hinged on this deal, renewable energy plants across 3 continents, and Kelvin was no longer just a translator. He was a linchpin, shaping the room with every word. Dylan's trust in him was absolute, his nods subtle but affirming as Kelvin navigated linguistic traps set by the consortium's lead negotiator, a steely-eyed woman named Dr. Zhang. Her questions were razor-sharp, probing for weaknesses. But Kelvin's fluency, honed in Chicago's libraries and streets, held firm. He clarified a Russian liability clause, then seamlessly explained an Arabic profit-sharing term, earning murmurs of approval from the Germans. Dr. Zhang's stern face softened, and by the meeting's end, she extended a hand. "You're exceptional," she said. Kelvin's chest swelled, the weight of his old invisibility lifting. As the deal closed, Dylan clapped Kelvin's shoulder. "You didn't just save this, you made it better. Name your role in my company." The offer was a coronation, but Kelvin's mind flickered to Chicago, to Mitch and the depot's lingering shadow. He'd risen, but the past wasn't done with him. Back in Chicago, Kelvin's return was a spark in a powder keg. Word of his Berlin triumph had spread, twisted by envy into rumors of betrayal. At the depot, Mitch had rallied the crew, his resentment now a vendetta. Kelvin arrived to collect his final paycheck, hoping to slip in and out, but Mitch was waiting, his bulk filling the break room doorway. Jake and Tom flanked him, their eyes glinting with malice. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and menace. "So, the scholar's back," Mitch sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Think you're too good for us now? Heard you're Laurent's pet." The crew laughed, but it was a brittle sound, masking fear. Kelvin's success was a mirror, reflecting their stagnation, and they hated him for it. Kelvin stood tall, his suit a stark contrast to their stained vests. "I'm not here to fight, Mitch. Just let me go." But Mitch stepped closer, his breath hot. "You don't get to walk away clean. You owe us." He shoved Kelvin hard, sending him stumbling into a table. Pain flared in Kelvin's ribs, but he caught himself, his eyes locking on Mitch's. Something shifted, a fire he'd buried under years of silence. "I owe you nothing," Kelvin said, his voice a blade. "You pushed me down every day, but I'm still standing. You're the one stuck here. Mitch, not me." The words hit like a slap, and Mitch's face twisted. He swung a fist, but Kelvin ducked, years of dodging insults sharpening his reflexes. The crew hesitated, their loyalty to Mitch wavering as Kelvin's defiance cracked their certainty. Before Mitch could swing again, a new voice cut through. "Enough!" Dylan Laurent stood in the doorway, his presence a thunderclap. Behind him, Claire held a phone, recording. The billionaire's blue eyes were ice, his tailored coat making the depot's grime seem smaller. "You touch him again, and you're done," Dylan said, his French accent sharpening the threat. "I've got lawyers who'll bury you." Mitch froze, his fist hovering. The crew shrank back, their bravado crumbling. Dylan stepped forward, handing Kelvin an envelope. "Your paycheck, and a bonus for Berlin." He turned to Mitch. "Kelvin's not your employee anymore. He's my director of global communications. Cross him, and you cross me." The words landed like a guillotine. Mitch's jaw worked, but no sound came. Jake and Tom slunk away, their eyes on the floor. Kelvin took the envelope, his hands steady. He looked at Mitch, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. "You could have been more," he said quietly. "But you chose this." As Kelvin walked out, Dylan at his side, the depot felt like a fading dream. Outside, under a Chicago sky streaked with dusk, Kelvin breathed deep. The city was his again, not as a cage, but as a canvas. Months later, Kelvin stood in a new office at Laurent Enterprises, its windows overlooking Lake Michigan. His desk held a nameplate, Kelvin Jackson, director. He'd hired a team, trained them in the languages he'd once taught himself, and led deals in Dubai, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. His apartment was gone, replaced by a loft in Hyde Park, where he hosted language classes for kids from Englewood, passing on his gift. Mitch was a footnote. The depot had fired him after an investigation, prompted by Claire's video revealed years of harassment. The crew scattered, some apologizing to Kelvin in hushed tones when they crossed paths. Their fall was quiet, inevitable, overshadowed by Kelvin's rise. One evening, Dylan called Kelvin to the mansion. Over coffee, the billionaire shared a rare smile. "You've changed my company," he said. "But more than that, you've changed how I see the world. Thank you." Kelvin nodded, his throat tight. He thought of his mother, of the boy who'd memorized words under a broken lamp. He'd kept his promise to her. As he left, Kelvin paused at the fountain where it all began. The garbage truck was long gone, but its echo lingered, a reminder of how far he'd come. He slipped Dylan's old business card into his pocket, not as a trophy, but as a talisman. The world had tried to break him, but he'd built a new one with his voice. Kelvin's journey from trash to triumph proves talent knows no bounds. Thank you for joining his fight against prejudice. Subscribe, like, and comment to share your thoughts. Let's inspire more stories of hope and change together.